children, they are abducted at the age of 8 or 10 or 12 and trained, and then they fight and they die.
When I was in school, in grade 10, I was abducted. I was so scared. One of my uncles knew very well about the Non-violent Peaceforce in Valacheni. So he advised my mom to go to Non-violent Peaceforce and talk about your daughter's needs so they might help you.
To sell peace is very difficult but to start a conflict is so easy. It is very demoralizing statement, but that's the facts of it.
In the last 100 years, the nature of armed conflict has changed tremendously. We are beginning to see more and more civilians, particularly women and children, suffering and dying in these very violent conflicts. From the grassroots communities to the United Nations, we're beginning to recognise that these violent conflicts will not be solved through militarism. What is being asked for now and demanded more and more are unarmed civilian peacekeepers to come into these very dangerous situations in order to give people space and confidence to begin to solve their problems.
In 1983, the wars in Guatemala, Nicaragua, and El Salvador were heating up. In that year, a delegation of North Americans visited a village on the border of Honduras. People were still burying their dead, and one of the delegates asked the villagers if they thought there would be another attack. And the response came back, "They won't attack while you're here."
Unarmed civilian peacekeeping is an idea that has been tried and tested over the last quarter of a century in places like Colombia, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Guatemala, and Palestine. These experiments have proved what is possible and what is still needed to really make a difference in how conflicts are handled in the world. In recent years, efforts have accelerated, focusing on increased professionalism and moving to a much larger scale. Nonviolent Peaceforce was founded in 2002. Its aim is to protect human rights, protect human life, and to help create the space needed for local people to begin to build their own bridges to peace.
A foreigner walking into a conflict now symbolizes something, a possibility of international cost, and just the whole idea that international law and human rights law in particular is somehow a moral issue. It's not just sort of political agreements. When you walk in and you're raising those issues or just representing them with your very presence, it makes people think differently about what they're doing.
I really have spent a great deal of time in the last 15 years trying to figure out why this works. Why can you go into a place where murderous people want to kill other people, and why are they likely to not do it when you're there? Let's just look at a simple model for the kind of violence that we're trying to put a stop to. You would generally have somebody's getting hurt, somebody's hurting them directly, and there's almost always someone higher up who has something to do with the decision that damage takes place. So what do we do as the international community when we see these big human rights abuses and we want to do something about it? Well, usually we set in motion international pressure on some level that is directed at the top of this picture. Our UN security resolutions, our big international reports on human rights abuses are aimed at a government or at the top of the picture. Now, why is it different when we put a whole lot of us on the ground? You're close to where the violence is happening. Once you have international personnel on the ground, there's almost always more international concern about the situation. And most important, you actually have the capacity to interact with people all the way down the chain of command because, first of all, you can figure out what the chain of command is. You can start to see who actually is calling the shots and having control, and you can start to go talk to them. And you start to actually be able to transmit from the international level down to the local level because you're there and you know how to make that transmission of concern happen.
Ultimately, governments and the United Nations need to recognise the value of unarmed civilian peacekeeping as a necessary policy option.
More and more, even the UN is beginning to work with other partners. They see that they alone cannot do everything that needs to be done, so partnerships are being developed more and more.
By using unarmed civilians working at the grassroots level, NP is able to gain the trust of local communities, and by maintaining its strict non-partisan stance, it is able to gain the trust of governments and armed groups who could do them harm.
Civilian peacekeepers have been able to have an impact in protecting civilians, in protecting people who are having to flee the guns as they approach their villages, but more importantly, to do prevention so that people don't have to flee in the first place.
This work requires real diplomacy, communication skills, and cultural sensitivity. Since 1983, there has been on and off civil war in Sri Lanka. In February 2002, a ceasefire agreement was signed by the Sri Lankan government and the Tamil Tigers, and people saw an opportunity for peace. Unfortunately, neither side was sufficiently committed to the peace process for it to hold, and by January 2008, the ceasefire agreement had collapsed completely.
And there have been situations where even international NGOs, they left the place, and it was extremely dangerous to stay put there. But our teams, Nonviolent Peaceforce teams, they didn't leave the community, no. This created great confidence among the local population that they stand with us.
Our role in Jaffna is to instill confidence, show the community that in a way you're not alone.
We are working a lot with families and vulnerable individuals, and we support the work of local human rights defenders.
The advantage that we bring, the fact that we are able to build long-standing relationships and to really understand firsthand what's happening.
The suffering that these people have gone through is in no way justifiable by any side. We do not strive to judge. We are just here to try and ensure that civilians are not as affected by violent conflict.
We can be really close to where the violence happened, to the people that are directly victim of violence. We can accompany people, we can move them around in order to protect them.
In areas where conflicts have persisted for many years, one of the most difficult challenges civilian peacekeepers face is overcoming a culture of silence.
Took us a long time, 2-3 years, to get the confidence of the people we're working with.
People will not freely share information because they are always afraid what they say will be misconstrued by the other side. Any little spark, anything, any little incident can immediately spread out to the whole district, even to the whole east.
Last month we had a problem, and myself and the people of the Nonviolent Peaceforce, we went there and we are able to reduce the tension in that place.
We are not taking any side of any groups or any community. That's why it's very important our role at that meeting. So we organize roundtable meetings, involvement of Tamil, Muslim, even security forces who are responsible for the security of the civilians.
There are Tamil, Muslims and Sinhalese. These are the three communities living here. So these three communities are trust with the NP because they have done their good job in the past.
They are in the forefront to organize peace meetings between the Tamils and Muslims, inviting religious and civil society leaders in the area to reduce the tension between the communities.
Nonviolent Peaceforce has accompanied anguished mothers seeking the return of their abducted children, often enabling them to successfully negotiate with the captors.
We met the parents, especially the mothers. They were walking on the road, barefoot. The tears were coming out of their eyes.
Prior to joining NP's peacekeeping project in the Philippines, Atif Hamid worked as a civilian peacekeeper in Sri Lanka.
They just fell on the road and they started crying that our children are taken by force in the middle of the night as they were sleeping, and there is nobody to help them. Nonviolent Peaceforce provided accompaniment to those parents, and we took them to a location where the children were being kept. Rebel group told them that they will not release their children and they can go back to their houses. So Nonviolent Peaceforce went ahead and we negotiated. Finally, they released all 26 children, and all this was done in 48 hours.
We could not go to the place where our abducted children were held without accompaniment of internationals. If we confronted the armed groups alone, we could face serious consequences. Whenever we called Nonviolent Peaceforce, they would help.
The parents who used to be silent when their children were abducted started taking up these issues themselves, started walking up to the training camps in groups. This is remarkable. To infuse this confidence.
Recruiting the right people, those who are experienced and motivated, and providing rigorous training is essential for building a large-scale peace force.
We want people who do have some international experience, but especially cross-cultural experience, because people will be working in teams that are not uniquely North American or European or from a global southern country, but a mixture.
Our peacekeepers are recruited in a very rigorous fashion.
Those who pass the initial screening are invited to an intensive 3-week core training. Those who remain after the core training are sent to various field sites for an additional 6 to 8 weeks of in-country training.
We've been doing this core training on a regional basis in Romania, where we did joint field exercises with the Romanian Army. Our core training involves a lot of role play and very rigorous experiential learning.
They have to really train people to be sensitive and careful and diplomatic and to think exactly how you communicate, everything you communicate, exactly what are the implications of every move you make everywhere you travel.
You never know what you can do until you face a situation. Before every intervention, you need to think and think and think and to see if your strategy would work, and in any case you need to have a plan B.
You need a lot of motivations and lots of positive way of thinking, and also self-control and self-management.
Nonviolent Peaceforce was invited to Mindanao by local civil society organisations to help them consolidate the peace process at the grassroots level. Mindanao has been in the midst of a heated conflict between the Philippine government and various armed groups fighting for a Muslim homeland. A ceasefire agreement in 2003 led to renewed hopes for a permanent settlement to the conflict. But sporadic fighting has continued, and in 2008 the ceasefire collapsed. NP opened offices in the autonomous regions of Muslim Mindanao.
There are government forces, there are rebel groups, there are paramilitaries, there are lawless elements. So all the presence of these different kind of groups, it makes the life a bit more uncomfortable and uneasy on the ground.
Ongoing war that is taking place between the government of the Republic of the Philippines and IMLF, that is resulting to a lot of human rights violations. And those human rights violations that are being committed should have to be closely monitored. And the presence of the international communities are really needed.
We see a lot of suffering, and our heart goes soft when we see things, is way beyond our comprehension.
The tension has been rising. Civilians are in fear of being caught in the crossfire. Thousands of them vacated their homes and are living in IDP centers.
Children are traumatized by these events, especially when they
see planes above, bombing their area. Gunshots, they hear gunshots and even see people being killed or shot at. In some cases, they themselves are victims of these indiscriminate bombings and crossfire.
Civilians are displaced, they need accompaniment, they need protection, and this is where Non-violent Peace Force is very much needed.
We have a lot of problem, lot of field side, everyday conflict. People asking our presence, our daily presence, because people need support.
Nonviolent Peace Force trains and strengthens civil society groups in order to empower local civilians with the tools they need to keep the peace.
With their presence, it reduces the tensions. When we say the presence of a non-violent, a foreigner, it reduces our fear. We have a very good relation when it comes to peace building.
We come to realize that peace building work includes also a monitoring of human rights situation so that we can respond immediately.
The demand for unarmed civilian peacekeeping is increasing. Nonviolent Peace Force has many requests from civil society organisations in areas of violent conflict, and there is a constant demand in the Philippines and Sri Lanka for more peacekeepers.
It's not only the job of the military, it's not only the job of the police, it's not only the job of the local constituents or the local officials or local government units to solve the problem, but it's everybody's job.
We hope that peace will exist in our Bangsamoro homeland.
Until and unless we empower people to understand the value of a culture of peace, the value of nonviolence, I believe that peace can be broken again and again.
We're not romanticizing these concepts. This is hard-nosed hope that's been fostered in some of the most violent places in the world today and is working. And there is growing recognition and, more importantly, a deep understanding among people that this is not only working, but this is the way that we have to go.
You didn't see the people of South Africa giving up the struggle just because in a demonstration or in a moment they were repressed by the police. This isn't an activity, this isn't an event or a campaign. This is work which people around the world are committed to because we know it's necessary.
It is being documented and shown that if we work at the community basis, if we work on prevention, if we work on deterrence, we can have a major impact in stopping war.
But it must grow in scale and scope in order to meet the great demands from conflict situations around the world.